I'm Tyson Weems, amateur debate referee, and this is my flag. I consider it a civic duty to promote conversations and arguments based on sound logic so society can find solutions to challenges. Today we'll look at Kellyanne Conway's exchange with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press from January 22nd. They discussed the dispute between certain members of the press and the White House over inauguration crowd size. Now I get that all politicians occasionally deflect and bring up their own talking points, even if beyond the scope of reporters' questions. And some reporters ask poorly framed and otherwise BS questions, for which they should be called out. I don't believe that's the case here, though, where Conway employs an impressive, I would argue frightening, array of logical fallacies. These are attempts to cheat to win an argument. And when we can't argue without cheating, or recognize it, democracy loses. I can recognize some logical fallacies because I'm wiki-smart. That is, I've studied Wikipedia's comprehensive page on the subject. You can check it out yourself. So let's get to it. Todd begins by asking Conway why President Trump sent out Press Secretary Sean Spicer to essentially litigate a provable falsehood when it comes to a small and petty thing like inaugural crowd size. Conway starts by listing things the Trump administration would like to accomplish, including replacing Obamacare with something much more free market and patient-centric in nature. This is the first of multiple red herrings. These are logical fallacies in which a speaker attempts to distract the audience by shifting from the topic at hand and introducing a separate one they'd rather discuss. Next, she actually addresses the crowd size issue by calling the press treatment about it unfair and incomplete. This counter-accusation is another red herring. She's trying to shift the focus from the administration's intentions to actions of the press. Next, Conway points to the Nielsen ratings for Trump's inauguration being better than for Obama's second inauguration as evidence that many people are or were enthused. I'm characterizing this as an existential fallacy, an argument with a broad premise and a specific but unsupported conclusion. We don't know how many people were watching out of support, horror, curiosity, or whatever. And yeah, it's also a red herring. She likes those. Then Todd repeats the question. Again, it was about the press secretary's falsehoods about crowd size. Then Conway responds that if that's how he's going to talk to her, we're going to have to rethink our relationship here. I interpret that as a slightly veiled threat, which would mean she's making an appeal to threat, an argument made through coercion or threats of force to support a position. In this case, a threat about NBC having reduced access to her or other administration and information sources. Next, Conway points out the false story from the day before about the removal of the Martin Luther King bust from the Oval Office. Todd points out that the story was quickly retracted and apologized for by the reporter. Conway then says it's evidence of the press being presumptively negative. There could be three simultaneous logical fallacies here. It's another red herring, since she wants to discuss something other than the actual question posed. It could also be a false equivalence, increasingly incorrectly describing two things as being equivalent. I would argue these are quite different. It could also be an attempt to have two wrongs make a right. This is where it's assumed that if one wrong is committed, like reporting incorrectly about the MLK bust, an equal but opposite wrong, Spicer's subsequent falsehoods, will cancel it out. Without more clarification from Conway, I say take your pick. Todd asks her again to answer the question. Conway says she answered it. When pressed, she repeats she already answered it. This constitutes an argument from repetition, also known as an argumentum ad nauseum. All of these logical fallacies seem to have Latin equivalents, but that one is commonly used. Then Todd repeats the question, adding Spicer's response undermines the credibility of the entire White House press office. Conway says, no, it doesn't. This could be an argument from incredulity, as in she can't imagine how it could be true, therefore it must be false, or perhaps an appeal to the stone, dismissing a claim as absurd without demonstrating proof of its absurdity. She's providing nothing to counter Todd's credibility argument. Then Conway accuses Todd of being overly dramatic, and then, at 2 minutes into the clip, says that Spicer gave, wait for it, alternative facts. For that, I'm going with double drivel. That's not an official term, and I'm not sure one exists to fully describe such a blatant assault on logic. But for now, I'll go with equivocation, the misleading use of a term with more than one meaning. One person could look at a number on the ground and say, it's a 6, while another person on the other side looking at it could say, it's a 9. Those would be alternative facts. In this case, Conway appears to be saying that she and the administration sees neither a 6 nor a 9, but rather a much, much larger number. Todd points out that 4 of the 5 statements Spicer made were false, adding, alternative facts are not facts, they're falsehoods. Conway starts asking if he thinks other things are facts. Like, do you think it's a fact that everything we heard from these women, protesters, yesterday happened on the watch of President Obama? Without addressing its flawed content and assumptions, this is another red herring, things she'd prefer to talk about rather than the question at hand. Todd repeats the question about why Spicer was sent out to share falsehoods. Conway then questions if it's possible to quantify crowds. This is another red herring, but also possibly a continuum fallacy, specifically fallacy of the heap. It's a thing. Improperly rejecting a claim for being imprecise. In this case, journalists making crowd size estimates and providing verifiable metro transportation usage numbers, different from Spicer's. Alternatively, this could be moving the goalposts or raising the bar, dismissing evidence against your claim by requiring more evidence that meets a higher standard. As in you can't accuse us of lying because nobody knows the exact size of the crowds. Todd laughs, and Conway accuses him of laughing at her. He says he's not laughing at her, but that he's just befuddled. Conway says his laughing at her is symbolic of the way we're treated by the press, but that she's bigger than that. I say this is an appeal to emotion, specifically pity, attempting to win the argument by having people pity you. Then she adds that she's a kind and gracious person. This appears to be a moral high ground fallacy, trying to win using a holier-than-thou attitude to look good. In the end, Conway never directly speaks to the administration's reasoning with having Spicer say what he did. It's hard to tell if they actually believe the numbers, like if their bubble has different math. Overall, she appears to be attempting to shift the burden of proof. That's a bonus logical fallacy. She need not prove her claims, in this case Spicer's. The press must prove they are false. I would argue they did so effectively, but she's sticking with that tune. That's all for this time around. If it were the NBA, Conway would have fouled out in the first quarter. For now, I'm Tyson Weems, calling it like I see it, with lots of help from Wikipedia.